So we've got Missouri State traveling to Middle Tennessee tonight, and honestly, this line feels like it's begging us to take a closer look. The Bears are getting a field goal on the road, but when you dig into what these teams have been doing lately, that spread starts looking awfully generous. Let me paint you the picture here. Missouri State just absolutely demolished someone 49-0, and I'm talking complete domination. Jacob Clark threw for 271 yards and 3 touchdowns, then added 2 more on the ground. This isn't some fluke performance either. Clark showing he can beat you in multiple ways, and that's exactly the kind of quarterback that gives defenses nightmares. But here's what really caught my attention. The Bears built a 35-0 halftime lead. That tells me this team knows how to start fast and put games away early. Compare that to Middle Tennessee, who just squeaked out a win against Nevada. And by squeaked out, I mean they were completely shut out until 6.5 minutes left in the game. Now, I'll give the Blue Raiders credit where it's due. Nicholas Vattiato showed some serious clutch gene, leading 2 scoring drives in that final stretch and punching in the game winner with 21 seconds left. That kind of late-game composure? You can't teach that. But here's the thing, you can't rely on miracle comebacks week after week. The power rankings give Missouri State a real edge here, and that's before we even talk about what Dash Luke brings to the table. 9 catches for 110 yards in that blowout win. This receiving core has some serious depth, and don't sleep on Shamari Lawrence either. 50-yard touchdown run on just 8 carries? That's the kind of big playability that can flip a game in an instant. Here's where it gets interesting from a betting perspective. Middle Tennessee is getting their usual home field advantage, about 2.8 points, which is actually above average. But the power ranking suggests Missouri State should be favored by about 4 points on a neutral field. That math puts real value on the Bears at +3. The weather's going to be a bit sticky tonight. 63 degrees at kickoff with 81% humidity. Players are going to be sweating from the first snap, and with winds gusting up to 14 miles per hour from the northeast, we might see some issues with the passing game, especially on those deep shots. But here's my read on this whole thing. Missouri State is a team that's figured something out. They moved from 0-2 to 2-2, and that trajectory suggests they're peaking at exactly the right time. Meanwhile, Middle Tennessee is still trying to find consistency. Being completely shut out for 53 minutes against Nevada? That's not exactly inspiring confidence. The Bears have shown they can blow teams out early, they've got a dual-threat quarterback who's clicking, and they're getting points on the road against a team that needed a miracle to beat Nevada. Sometimes the betting market overvalues home field advantage, especially when one team is clearly playing better football right now. I'm seeing Missouri State as the better team, getting the better number here. Clark's mobility, that balanced rushing attack, and the ability to start fast, that's a recipe for covering 3 points on the road. So here's the thing about this Liberty at UTEP matchup. On paper, it looks like a pretty straightforward road favorite situation, but when you start digging into what these teams actually are right now, it gets a lot more interesting from a betting perspective. Liberty's sitting at 1-3, and that record isn't really telling the full story of how bad things have gotten offensively. We're talking about a team that managed just 75 passing yards against James Madison. 75 yards. Their quarterback, Ethan Vasco, threw for 37 yards in that game. That's not a typo. Now, he did add 52 rushing yards, so he's mobile, but when your passing game is that anemic, you're basically telegraphing to opposing defenses exactly what you're going to do. And here's where it gets really interesting for this UTEP matchup. The Miners just came off their bye week, which means they've had extra time to prepare for Liberty's predictable offensive approach. Meanwhile, Liberty's dealing with a brutal travel situation. We're talking 1,599 miles from Lynchburg, Virginia to El Paso, Texas, plus a 2-hour time adjustment. And then there's the altitude factor at 3,900 feet, which definitely impacts teams that aren't used to it. But here's the flip side, and why this isn't just an automatic UTEP play. The Miners have their own quarterback issues, and they might actually be worse. Malachi Nelson threw 3 picks in their last game against UL Monroe, including a game-ending interception at their own 43-yard line. But, and this is a big but, Nelson also threw for 404 yards in that same game. So you've got these two teams with completely opposite problems. Liberty can't throw the ball at all, but they're not turning it over much. UTEP can move the ball through the air, They've got two receivers who both went over 100 yards last game, but Nelson's throwing picks at the worst possible times. The power rankings give Liberty about 2.8 points of value at the current spread, which makes sense when you consider UTEP's home field advantage is only 2.4 points, well below the typical 3 to 3.5 you'd expect. But here's what's really catching my attention: the weather. We're looking at 18-mile-per-hour winds throughout the day, gusting up to 26, coming from the east-southeast. That's significant wind that's going to impact any passing game, and it favors the team that can establish a ground game. Well, guess what? Liberty's already been forced into being a run-first team because they can't throw anyway. So you've got Liberty, who's already adapted to life without a passing attack, going up against a UTEP team that's shown they can move the ball through the air, but also that they'll give you short fields with turnovers. In windy conditions, that turnover problem becomes even more pronounced for Nelson, while Liberty's ground-based approach becomes more viable. The total's sitting around 52.5, and I'm really liking the under here. You've got two teams with serious offensive limitations. Liberty because they can't throw, UTEP because they can't protect the football. Add in those 18-mile-per-hour winds, and scoring's going to be at a premium. UTEP showed some fight in that fourth quarter against UL Monroe, scoring 18 points when they were down big, but that was in ideal conditions. Now they're facing a Liberty defense that, while not spectacular, doesn't give up the explosive plays that got UTEP back in that game. The line's basically telling us that the books think these teams are pretty evenly matched when you factor in the travel and home field, but I think that underestimates just how problematic this travel situation is for Liberty. You're talking about a team that's already struggling offensively, now dealing with cross-country travel, time zones, and altitude they're not used to. The value play here might actually be UTEP plus the points and the under. The Miners get their offense back on track just enough to keep pace with a Liberty team that's going to struggle even more than usual, but neither team has the firepower to push this total over in windy conditions. So here's what I'm seeing with this Louisiana Tech at Kennesaw State matchup. And it's actually pretty fascinating when you dig into the numbers. Louisiana Tech comes in as the road favorite, getting 2.5 points, which immediately tells me the market respects what they've been doing. But here's the thing. Kennesaw State just had a bye week to prepare, and when I look at how these teams have been performing, there's some real value hiding in this spread. Let me start with Louisiana Tech's recent game against Southern Miss. They absolutely dominated the first half, 30-10 at the break. Blake Baker threw for 239 yards, hit a 73-yard bomb to Eli Finley for a touchdown, and their defense was creating havoc. Kobe Fields had a 48-yard pick six that basically broke the game open early. But here's where it gets interesting. Louisiana Tech completely went to sleep in the second half. They managed 3 points after halftime while getting outgained 514 to 340 for the game. That's concerning, especially when you're laying points on the road. Now flip to Kennesaw State's last game before the bye. Amari Odom was absolutely electric. 409 total yards, 308 passing, 101 rushing. The guy's a dual-threat nightmare. They jumped out to an early lead against Arkansas State, scoring on their first 3 possessions. But what really caught my attention? When Arkansas State made it a game late, cutting it to 28-21 with 10 minutes left, Kennesaw State's defense completely locked down. They allowed 18 total yards on Arkansas State's final 3 possessions. That's clutch football, and it shows me they know how to close games. The power rankings suggest Louisiana Tech is the stronger team overall, but I'm seeing some red flags. That second half offensive disappearing act is troubling, and now they're going on the road against a team that's had 2 weeks to prepare. Speaking of preparation, Kennesaw State's offense is built around Odom's versatility. He can beat you with his arm or his legs, and they've got weapons like Garland Benyard, who torched Arkansas State for 6 catches and 114 yards, including a 54-yard touchdown. The weather's actually going to be a factor here. 66 degrees at kickoff sounds nice, but we're looking at 87% humidity and winds gusting up to 14 miles per hour from the east. That's going to make passing more difficult, especially on those deep balls that Louisiana Tech loves to hit. Here's my read on the value. The market's giving Louisiana Tech respect for being the better team on paper, but they're not accounting for the bye-week advantage, the home field, and those concerning second-half trends. Kennesaw State's getting 2.5 points at home with extra prep time against a team that's shown they can go cold offensively. The power rankings suggest there's about 2.5 points of value on Louisiana Tech, but I think that's missing the bigger picture. Sometimes the situational factors outweigh the raw talent, and this feels like one of those spots where the home dog with the bye week and the dual-threat quarterback could pull off the upset. So here's what we've got. Thursday night, East Carolina making that 800-mile trek down to New Orleans to face Tulane in what's basically a perfect storm of situational spots. And honestly, this line feels off when you dig into what just happened to both these teams. Let's start with the obvious. Both squads are coming off absolutely brutal reality checks. Tulane got boat raced by Ole Miss 45-10, looking completely overmatched with just 282 yards of total offense. Their quarterback, Jake Retzlaff, started 0 for 9. 0 for 9, that's not just a bad day, that's a complete system breakdown. But here's where it gets interesting. ECU's loss to BYU might actually be more telling for betting purposes. Yeah, they lost, but the way they lost? 2 pick sixes, 7 false start penalties, goal line interceptions. That's not talent, that's mental mistakes. And mental mistakes, well, those are fixable. Or they're not, and they compound under pressure. The power rankings have these teams essentially dead even, with Tulane holding just the slightest edge. But the betting market? They're laying points at home, and with their 3-point home field advantage boost, which is actually stronger than usual for Tulane, we're looking at about 1.5 points of value on the Pirates. Now let me tell you why that value might be real. ECU just faced their first legitimate opponent in BYU, and, despite the turnovers, they moved the ball. They reached BYU's 10-yard line twice. The talent's there. It's the execution that's killing them. Meanwhile, Tulane's offensive struggles against Ole Miss weren't just about facing a good defense. Their line got dominated, Retzlaff couldn't complete a pass to save his life, and they turned the ball over on downs 3 times in the second half. That's systematic failure across multiple units. Here's the kicker, though, and this is where the weather narrative gets spicy. We're looking at 79 degrees at kickoff with 80% humidity. That's basically playing football in a sauna. High-tempo teams that rely on conditioning advantages, they could fade hard in the second half. And guess which team just showed they struggle to finish drives when things get tough? The wind's going to be light, maybe 5 to 8 miles per hour from the east, so passing shouldn't be affected much. But that heat and humidity? That's a legitimate factor that could favor the team that can establish a ground game and control tempo. ECU's got this short week situation too. They're opening AAC play on a Thursday after getting their doors blown off. Usually that's a fade spot, but sometimes teams respond better to adversity when they don't have time to overthink it. Look, Tulane still got those CFP hopes alive despite the Ole Miss beatdown. Coach Sumrall knows they need to start strong in conference play. But when I watch tape of both these teams, I keep coming back to the same thing. ECU's problems look fixable, while Tulane's look structural. The quarterback situation in particular, if Retzlaff struggles again, are we going to see Brendan Sullivan? Because Sullivan actually threw their only touchdown pass against Ole Miss. That kind of uncertainty at the position, in a conference opener, in that heat, that's not where you want to be laying points. I'm not saying ECU wins this game outright, but getting points with a team that has value based on power rankings against an opponent that just showed major offensive line and quarterback concerns, in a spot where both teams are trying to bounce back but only one is getting points, that feels like the right side of this number. So Jacksonville State is heading to Huntsville to face Sam Houston, and this line is screaming value if you know where to look. The Gamecocks opened at -4.5, but here's the thing. Sam Houston is sitting at 0-4 after getting absolutely obliterated by Texas, 55-0. Now, I get it. Getting blown out by Texas doesn't mean you're terrible, but when you manage just 17 yards on your first 15 plays, when you can't get a single first down to start the game, that's not just getting beat by a better team, that's getting exposed at a fundamental level. Jacksonville State, meanwhile, just dominated Murray State in every phase. 329 rushing yards with 4 different guys fighting the end zone. Cam Cook ran for 147, but it wasn't just him. They had Lando with 68, Creel with 58, and even quarterback Gavin Wimsatt chipped in 50 yards on the ground. That's the kind of balanced attack that wears down defenses especially ones that just got steamrolled by elite competition. But here's where it gets interesting from a betting perspective. The power rankings suggest Jacksonville State should be laying around 7 points, not 4.5. That's almost 3 points of value on Sam Houston getting the points, and that's before we factor in the standard 2.5-point home field advantage. Now, I'm not saying Sam Houston is going to win this game outright. They've looked awful through 4 weeks. But in a sport where 3 points can be the difference between covering and not, getting nearly 3 points of mathematical value is significant. The weather's going to be perfect. 73 degrees, light winds from the east-northeast, no rain, so we can throw out any environmental factors. This comes down to pure execution and talent evaluation. Jacksonville State's been money in the red zone, going 6 for 6 against Murray State. Their defense came up with a crucial goal line interception when Murray State got down to the 3-yard line. These are the kind of momentum-shifting plays that separate good teams from mediocre ones. The question is, are they actually a good team, or did they just beat up on another winless squad? Murray State is 0-4, just like Sam Houston. So we're basically looking at Jacksonville State's resume against bottom-tier competition and trying to project how they'll perform on the road. Here's my read on this game. Jacksonville State should win, probably by a touchdown or more. Their ground game will control the clock. Wimsatt's shown he can manage the offense effectively, and their defense makes plays when it matters. But 4.5 points might be asking too much when you're traveling 600 miles to face a desperate team at home. Sam Houston needs something to build on. They've been embarrassed 3 weeks running, and sometimes rock bottom becomes a launching pad. Not saying they're going to shock the world, but getting nearly a touchdown at home when the power rankings suggest the line should be higher, that's the kind of spot where sharp money often lands on the dog. The total's sitting around 48, and with Jacksonville State's ability to control games on the ground and Sam Houston's offensive struggles, the under might be the cleaner play here. But if you're looking for a side, that extra value on the Bearcats is hard to ignore. So we've got Georgia Southern hosting Southern Miss on Saturday, and the betting market is telling a completely different story than what the power rankings suggest. We're looking at a 5.8-point discrepancy here, which is, well, that's massive. The odds makers have Southern Miss getting 3.5 points, but the power rankings, they're screaming Georgia Southern all day long. And when you dig into why, it starts to make sense. Let's talk about what happened to Georgia Southern in their last outing against USC. Yeah, they got blown out 39-17. But here's the thing. They actually moved the ball pretty effectively, racking up 377 yards. Camden Brown caught 2 touchdown passes in the first half alone. The problem wasn't their offense. It was their defense getting absolutely torched. USC put up 755 total yards on them. 755. They gave up explosive plays of 62 and 74 yards in just the first quarter. 7 plays longer than 35 yards for the entire game. That secondary looked like they were playing with concrete boots. But here's where it gets interesting for this matchup. Southern Miss just came off a game where they threw for 392 yards against Louisiana Tech. Braylon Braxton looked sharp. Carl Chester had 5 catches for 152 yards and a touchdown. If Georgia Southern's secondary is still struggling with those same issues, well, you can see where this is going. Now, Georgia Southern does have some advantages working in their favor. They're finally playing at home after starting the season with back-to-back road games against Fresno State and USC. That home field advantage is worth about 3 full points, which is more than the usual boost. And they're coming off a bye week, so Clay Helton's had extra time to address some of those defensive breakdowns. But Southern Miss has their own situational edge. They're dealing with just a 1-hour time adjustment, which is basically nothing. Meanwhile, Georgia Southern is still trying to figure out their quarterback situation. They started freshman Weston Bryant against USC, and Turner Helton saw some action in the fourth quarter. That kind of uncertainty at the most important position? Not exactly what you want when you're trying to establish rhythm. The weather's going to be a factor too. We're looking at winds around 12 miles per hour from the northeast, gusting up to 18. That's going to affect the passing games for both teams, and it definitely gives an edge to whoever can establish the ground game more effectively. Here's what I keep coming back to, though. Southern Miss showed they can move the ball against a decent Louisiana Tech defense, putting up 514 total yards. But they also showed some concerning trends in crunch time. They went 0 for 2 on 4th down conversions, including a crucial turnover on downs from Louisiana Tech's 40 in the fourth quarter. Those kind of execution issues in key moments can be the difference between covering and not covering. The total sitting at 52.5, and with both of these defenses showing some serious vulnerabilities, the over might be the more interesting play here. Georgia Southern's secondary issues aren't going away overnight, even with a bye week to prepare. And Southern Miss has proven they can put up points when their passing game clicks. The key question for me is whether Georgia Southern's home field advantage and extra preparation time can overcome what the power rankings are suggesting that this should essentially be a pick'em game. The market's giving you almost 6 points of value if you trust the computer models over the odds makers. With wins affecting both passing attacks and two teams that have shown they can move the ball but struggle defensively, this feels like one of those games where the team that makes fewer mistakes in the red zone is going to cash tickets. So we've got North Texas hosting South Florida this week, and there's some serious value hiding in plain sight here. The power rankings have South Florida as the better team. Not by much, but enough to matter. Meanwhile, the betting market has North Texas laying points at home. That's a 2.4-point disagreement which, well, that's the kind of gap that catches my attention. Let me walk you through what's really happening here. North Texas is coming off a bye after that wild overtime win against Army where they almost blew a huge lead. I mean, they were cruising, then Army throws a 68-yard touchdown bomb and kicks a field goal with 9 seconds left to tie it up. But here's the thing. They didn't fold. Caleb Hawkins punched it in from 3 yards out in overtime to seal the deal. That Army win? It's actually pretty impressive when you dig into it. Army went undefeated in conference play last season, so beating them, even messily, shows North Texas has some real fight in them. They're 4-0 for the first time since 2018, and their ground game is legit. Hawkins and Mackenzie McGill II both went over 90 yards rushing in that Army game, so they've got depth in the backfield. But here's where it gets interesting. South Florida just got absolutely demolished by Miami. We're talking a 64-6 beatdown over their last 60 minutes of play dating back to last season. That sounds terrible, right? Well, maybe not so fast. Before that Miami disaster, South Florida was actually looking pretty good. They beat ranked Boise State, they beat Florida. These aren't scrub wins. And even in that Miami blowout, they showed they can still create big plays. Chaz Nimrod caught 4 passes for 128 yards, including bombs of 53 and 43 yards. The talent is there. The problem for South Florida isn't necessarily their ceiling. It's execution against elite competition. Miami's defense is on another level compared to what North Texas brings to the table. This feels like a classic case of a team getting overpenalized by the market for one bad performance against a much superior opponent. Now, North Texas does get a solid home field advantage, 2.8 points according to the data, which is well above average. Their fans show up, and that Apogee Stadium can get pretty loud for the right games. But even factoring that in, the power ranking still favors South Florida. The weather's going to be perfect, 74 degrees, light winds from the east-southeast, no rain, so we can throw out any weather-related factors. This is going to come down to execution and which team can handle the moment better. Here's my read on it. North Texas is getting a bit too much credit for that Army win, especially considering how they nearly gave it away. Yes, they showed resilience in overtime, but they also showed they can get tight when they should be putting teams away. South Florida, meanwhile, is catching way too much heat for getting boat raced by a Miami team that's probably going to win 10 games this year. The Bulls are making a 944-mile trip, which isn't ideal, but they've shown they can handle the road. And honestly, sometimes a good beating can refocus a team, especially one with legitimate talent like South Florida has. With the power rankings giving South Florida that edge and the market disagreeing by more than 2 points, this feels like a spot where the value is sitting right there on the visiting team. The Bulls might be a bit banged up emotionally, but they're not banged up talent-wise. And against a North Texas defense that had to survive Army's comeback, I think they find a way to move the ball consistently enough to keep this thing competitive. Washington's hosting Rutgers this weekend, and the more I dig into this matchup, the more fascinating it becomes from a betting perspective. You've got two teams coming off completely different Week 1 experiences, and the market's telling us something interesting here. Let's start with what jumped off the page. Rutgers just made a 2,400-mile trek to Seattle. We're talking about one of the longest road trips in college football, crossing 3 time zones, and they're doing it off a bye week. Now, conventional wisdom says the bye helps with preparation, but when you're asking East Coast kids to adjust their body clocks by 3 hours and play in a completely different environment, that's a massive physiological challenge. Washington's coming off a statement win where they scored on literally every possession. DeMond Williams threw for 298 yards and 4 touchdowns, while adding 88 rushing yards. This isn't just good quarterback play. This is elite dual-threat ability that can stress defenses in multiple ways. And here's the kicker. They ended a 5-game road losing streak in that performance, which suggests they figured something out under Jedd Fisch. But here's where it gets interesting for bettors. The market's got Washington favored, but the power rankings are showing Rutgers with about 2 points of value. So we're looking at a situation where the public perception might not match the underlying metrics. Now, Rutgers has some legitimate strengths. They converted all 5 fourth-down attempts in their opener. That's not luck. That's confidence and execution in pressure moments. And their special teams unit? They've blocked 44 punts under Schiano with 16 returned for touchdowns. That's not a fluke. That's a systematic advantage that can flip field position in an instant. The problem for Rutgers is their third-down defense got carved up, allowing 5 of 10 conversions against Ohio. If they can't get off the field on third down against Washington's balanced attack, well, this could get ugly fast. Weather's going to be a factor too. 50-degree kickoff with 12-mile-per-hour winds during the day, settling to about 6 miles per hour from the south during game time. That's not game-changing, but it's enough to make deep balls and field goals a little trickier than usual. The total's sitting in an interesting spot because Washington just put up 59 points, but that was against lesser competition. Rutgers showed they can move the ball with transfer quarterback Kaliakmanis, throwing for 252 yards and 2 scores, but can they sustain drives against a Washington defense that forced 3 turnovers last week? Here's my read. The travel factor is being underestimated by the market. You're asking college kids to perform at their peak after crossing the entire continent, dealing with jet lag, and playing in an environment that's completely foreign to them. Washington's got legitimate talent with Williams at quarterback. They're at home where they have a strong 2.7 home field advantage, and they're coming off a confidence-building performance. The situational spot screams Washington. The power rankings suggest there might be some Rutgers value, but sometimes the situation trumps the numbers when you factor in the extreme travel, the time zone adjustment, and Washington's need to prove they belong in their new conference. This feels like a spot where the home team covers and potentially blows it open if Rutgers can't handle the cross-country adjustment. All right, so we've got Fresno State traveling to Colorado State Saturday night, and this line is telling us a story about 2 programs heading in completely opposite directions. The Bulldogs are sitting pretty at 4-0 after that season opener stumble against Kansas, which, let's be honest, probably looks better now than it did at the time. Since then, they've been rolling, and that win in Hawaii last week was, well, it was classic Fresno State. Down late, defense comes up clutch with Kavion Thunderbird's pick 6 in the 4th quarter. That's not luck, that's what good teams do. Now, here's where it gets interesting for us. E.J. Warner is quietly having himself a season. 22 of 29 for 230 and a touchdown in Hawaii. That's 76% completion rate in a road conference opener. The kid's got poise, and when you're betting college football, quarterback play and pressure moments, that's everything. Colorado State, on the other hand, man, these guys are breaking my heart. 1-2, but it's how they're losing that should have us paying attention. They just dropped a 17-16 heartbreaker to UTSA after a failed 2-point conversion with 29 seconds left. Before that, another close loss. This is becoming a pattern, and patterns matter when we're trying to find value. The Rams are still figuring out their quarterback situation. Braden Fowler-Nicolosi and Tosh Bullock both got significant reps against UTSA, which tells me Jay Norvell still doesn't know who his guy is. That uncertainty, it shows up in clutch moments. It shows up exactly when you don't want it to as a bettor. But here's what's keeping me from completely writing off Colorado State. Lloyd Avant ran for 96 yards on 10 carries last week. When you can run the ball effectively, especially at 5,100 feet of elevation, that changes everything. Fresno State's coming off a short week, traveling 830 miles, dealing with that altitude. Speaking of that altitude, this is real. 5,100 feet isn't Denver, but it's enough to matter. especially for a team that just played in Hawaii and now has to adjust again. The weather is actually perfect. 59 degrees at kickoff, minimal wind, so we're not getting any help from the elements. My power rankings have Fresno State as the better team, no question, but Colorado State's only getting 2 points at home, and that home field advantage is actually below average according to the data. So we're basically looking at Fresno State laying half a point on a neutral field against a team that's, well, they're not terrible, they're just cursed. The total's sitting at 52.5, and that feels about right. Both offenses have shown they can move the ball, but neither defense is elite. Warner's efficiency for Fresno State, Avant's running for Colorado State. There's enough offensive capability here to get over, especially if this stays close and we get some late-game fireworks. But if I'm being honest, the value looks like it's on Fresno State getting less than a field goal. They're the better team, they've shown they can win close games on the road, and Colorado State keeps finding ways to lose games they should win. Sometimes in college football, momentum and confidence are worth more than home field advantage.